and I am extremely excited to be the Thank you. I am extremely excited to be the first presenter of this program. As the collections manager of Historic Columbia, I do a lot of behind the scenes things to ensure that our 4,000 piece object collection is managed. This involves caring for the physical objects and its associated paperwork, as well as providing some research and interpretation about these objects. In today's presentation, we are going to examine some of the objects within our collection that you may recognize from a recent tour you took of one of our properties. For those who are a little less familiar with our sites, don't worry, as I will be giving a brief introduction of our properties, as well as giving you some additional information about Historic Columbia itself. We will also discuss general ways in which our collection is cared for and what exactly we are collecting here at Historic Columbia. Founded in 1961 by a group of preservationists intent on saving the Robert Mills House, Historic Columbia is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving Columbia and Richland County's historic and cultural heritage. Historic Columbia uses our platform to preserve sites in Columbia and in Richland County, and to share the stories of the past through preservation efforts, educational experiences, and community advocacy. Today, Historic Columbia manages 5 historic house museums, including the Robert Mills House, the Hampton Preston Mansion, the Museum of the Reconstruction Era at the Woodrow Wilson Family Home, the Man Simon Site and Outdoor Museum, and the Majeska Montes Simpkins House. Historic Columbia also cares for a 6th property, the Siebels House. This final property is not open to tours, but like our other properties, its grounds and its gardens are open Tuesday through Sunday, should you enjoy a nice stroll outside. While the Robert Mills House and the Hampton Preston House are historic house museums, meaning they feature period rooms, our other 3 sites function more as typical museums with cases and written interpretation throughout the property. A good number of our 4,000 piece object collection is on display in our homes, allowing you to see many objects from the past while visiting our sites. We collect very specific objects at Historic Columbia. We are actively collecting objects for our collection. When an object comes to our attention, whether it is through an auction or a donor is interested in donating it to us, we begin the formal process to accession the object into our collection. This process entails working with the donor to learn more about the object in order to see if it would fit and grow our collection. To do this, we ask a few questions about the object. First, we ask, what? What is the object and what is it used for? We need to know if we already have that type of object in our collection, or if it's something we can display safely. Then we ask where. Where was the object made, or where was it used? As an organization focusing on the history of Columbia and the greater Richland County, we are prioritizing objects that have a tie to that city and to the county, but we do collect other locally made objects from South Carolina. Still, sometimes we do collect things that were made elsewhere because they fit into what we are trying to interpret. Once we determine the where, we then ask when. When was the object made and used? This can help us in determining where the object can be displayed in one of our sites. It would be a little weird if you walked into the Hampton Preston dining room, which is set for an 1840s meal and was greeted with a 1960s postcard. Luckily, we have a broad range of time periods that we collect, ranging from the 1820s all the way to the 1990s. We even have a few objects that predate that or postdate that. And then we wonder why. Then we wonder who. Who was it used for, or who made the object? We actively are searching for more objects made or used in Columbia, or somebody who is connected to one of our historic house museums. We do have a collection of ephemera that also relates to Columbia residents and businesses. Then we wonder why. Why do we need this object? Does it align with what we are already displaying, or will it help us to interpret other ideas? Through asking these questions, we can also think about if the object would actually better serve another institution in the area. Lastly, we ask how, and we do this in a couple different ways. We ask, how can we interpret this object across many different platforms? Unfortunately, we aren't able to display every single object we have in our collection, but we want to have that object's information easily accessible to the public. As we'll discuss in a little bit, we are actively putting our collection online so that you all can view it digitally, but we also write various social media posts and collaborate with other publications and with other institutions where we would like to utilize the object and discuss its history. We also ask, how can we display the object? We like to display our pieces when we can. There are some objects that are a little too heavy or a little too big to safely store or display at our properties, and therefore that would put other aspects of our collection at risk. Finally, this directly relates to how can we care for these objects? We want to ensure that we have the ability to care for every object given they are in any condition. If the object is not stable, however, we may not have the ability to care for it properly or to conserve it. We would then consider if there is another institution that may be better suited to take care of that object. Throughout all of that, you may be wondering, then what do we actually have in our collection? The answer is a lot of different things with a lot of different mediums. We have furniture, art, and textiles from all over. We have architectural salvage from local businesses that are no longer standing. We have historic ceramic pieces, silver pieces, and tools that relate to inhabitants of the city, or just from the general time period. We have various forms of archival materials like books, maps, newspapers, postcards, stereographs, and other forms of correspondence from businesses that no longer exist, but had an impact on our community. And through all those objects, we also consider objects that relate directly to the city. We are able to preserve the history of Columbia through our objects and tell the story of those who live there. Now, using these guidelines, I want to briefly walk you through an example. Quite recently, we took in some new pieces into our collection. These pieces were all connected to a local cabinet maker by the name of Milo Berry. When something comes to our attention for acquisitioning, we do a little bit of background on the piece. So to give you an extremely brief run through of Berry's life, Berry was born in New Jersey in 1819. It was in New Jersey that he learned his trade as a cabinet maker. Shortly after his marriage to a woman named Harriet Meigs, who can be seen in the image on the right side of your screen, Berry signed a contract to build furniture for a hotel in Charleston. Shortly then after, the Berrys moved to Columbia, where Milo established a storefront and a warehouse at 107 Main Street, which was formerly called Richardson Street. While his business began to boom, his wife Harriet unfortunately died, leading him to marry another woman named Julia Meigs, who just so happened to be his late wife's sister. Milo had 4 children with his first wife, Harriet, and 6 with his second wife, Julia. It is believed that all 10 of the children were born in the state of South Carolina. Berry continued to work until he retired in 1903 at the age of 84. He then passed away in 1907, a year after Julia's death. These are 2 items that recently were brought into our collection with a connection to Berry. While they have been on our radar for a very long time, the wonderful donor was recently willing to part with them. The donor's spouse was a direct descendant of Berry, tasked not only with caring for these objects, but also the stories that went along with them. The sign that you can see on the left is made out of metal, and it's roughly 8 inches tall by a foot long. The sign you can see is very cluttered, to put it nicely. Berry was doing multiple businesses at the time. He was selling furniture, but he was also an undertaker. Many furniture makers at this time, including Berry, moonlighted as undertakers because the craft was so similar to furniture making and required very similar materials. Using every aspect of this space to advertise his business and show a few of his wares, you can actually see tucked into the bed an example of a washstand, another piece of Berry's handiwork. This washstand was also donated, well, a likeness of this washstand was also donated by the donor, as you can see on the right of your screen. Now, this washstand is very incredible because of some writing that was found underneath the marble top. The piece is signed M.H. Berry, Columbia, South Carolina. The secondary wood, meaning the wood that was used to frame the piece internally, which is hidden from view, is made of a recycled shipping crate, as evident by the stamp Charleston, South Carolina in the top right corner. We are still doing a little bit more research to understand the other writing on the piece. Now, using those guidelines we stated earlier, let's walk through them as we examine this piece. So what is it? It's a washstand. Washstands were used to hold daily grooming needs, such as a water pitcher, a water basin, and soap. These were used daily for washing one's hands and washing one's face. They declined in popularity in the 19th century due to the wonderful invention of indoor plumbing. Now, we know where it's from. It was from Colombia. Barry lived in Colombia for the remainder of his life, and as his piece descended through his family, we also know it stayed in the area for the remainder of the time. Even in his modern day descendants, as they are South Carolina residents, this piece remained in the state. We have a large window of time reflected in our collection. This piece fits into the scope of the 1820s and 1990s. We are still working to narrow down this date more, but we know Barry opened his operation in Colombia in 1845 and continued to work until 1903, providing a 58-year range in which this piece was created. We also know this piece was made by a Columbia resident as it was passed down through his family. We also know it was used by Columbia residents. And his general connection to Columbia area makes this site relevant, or this object relevant to HC's collection. As far as the how, our next steps are establishing more care for this object and how we are going to display this piece. We will first clean it with a museum safe solution and then let the piece remain in quarantine for about 30 days. This is a precautionary measure that we run all of our pieces through to mitigate any insect activity or mold activity from spreading to our larger collection. After a very thorough search of this piece, we do not think insect or mold activity will be a risk, but we are still letting it withstand this 30-day precautionary period. After this period, the piece will either be absorbed directly into interpretation or it will be placed in storage until we can find its new location. Now, all of our pieces on display receive various types of care. In a given day, we have a staff member doing walkthrough of our properties while opening and closing the museums. During these walkthroughs, they ensure objects are where they should be, the exhibit space is clean from debris and dust, and the overall site is secure. This provides safety and security for the building, the objects, and our visitors and staff. Our staff is trained to look for any damage of potential risk to the building or the objects themselves, allowing us to promptly address any issue. This includes a general search for insect or rodent activity. These pests are very good at seeking shelter in historic buildings, and they even like to snack on historic artifacts. Our goal is to minimize their ability to enter the museums while also deterring them from entering in the first place. One easy way to help us in these efforts is to remove the presence of food and sugary drinks during your tour, as the smell of a tasty meal is often the driving force to allow these pests to wander into the museum. The environment can also damage our collection and our historic buildings. Provided on every floor of our museums are data loggers, which record the changes of temperature, light, and humidity. Too high of temperature or too high of humidity can greatly affect our objects, particularly our paintings. Sunlight can also quickly fade an object, especially our textiles and our archival materials. South Carolina is a very hot, humid, and sunny state, and therefore we are always attempting to keep our museums cool and shady. However, historic buildings often like to play by different rules, and they struggle to maintain a lower internal temperature at times. These data loggers constantly are monitoring the interior of the building, and they notify us when the environment is nearing potentially harmful levels, allowing us to be able to address the issue as soon as possible. As typical with almost every museum, the majority of our objects displayed at Historic Columbia are for looking, not for touching. We have plexiglass cases or stanchions in place to ensure that visitors maintain a safe distance from our objects. Not only can the oils from our hands damage the objects over time, but there is unfortunately always the potential risk that a piece may be dropped and then therefore damaged. Collection staff receives training on how to best handle each type of object in our collection, and we are constantly wearing gloves when we interact with our collection. There are various activities within our museums that do encourage tactile learning, and the museums involved, or these objects involved in these activities, are clearly labeled so that they can be safely handled by members of the public. Even though our sites are monitored daily, we are completing extensive yearly inventories of our collection. These inventories include examining the piece for any type of damage and notating this damage as specifically as possible. Should we not be able to mend the damage, or should the damage not be of a high enough caliber to repair it, we track this damage over time. Knowing the extent of the damage influences our decision regarding if the piece should be removed from the collection, be sent to a conservator, or possibly removed entirely from our collection. As you can see in this painting, there is a slight little bit of damage to the sitter's right eye, which is something we have been monitoring. This damage is not to the extent in which we need to take the painting off of display, but we will monitor this damage using photographs and reports to track the damage. Some types of objects require special care. Historic Columbia has nearly 300 pieces of silver in the collection, which gets evaluated every year and polished as needed. This involves the silver in the collection, which can get evaluated every year. By mixing chemicals and by having a fine attention to detail, we are able to clean these pieces and ensure that none of these chemicals remain on the pieces over time. We do this every year in November, just in time for holiday tours, as we know that is when we have one of the largest influx of visitors to our properties. Historic Columbia also has a very large textile collection, which includes historic clothing, linens, samplers, and quilts. Our 30-piece historic quilt collection is folded yearly, usually by volunteers, instructed and supervised by myself. Folding a single quilt requires 2 or more sets of hands, a large amount of acid-free museum-safe paper, and a strong eye to ensure that no moths have burrowed into the piece to cause any potential damage. Now, anytime a piece is handled, whether it's during an inventory, a silver polishing, or a quilt folding, this information is recorded and maintained in our collections management database. This database contains information on the provenance or ownership history of the object, information of when or why the object was last handled, and any relevant information like the object's age, its measurements, or its condition. Now, some of this information can actually be accessed at home by you all. If you are interested in seeing some of our pieces up close, or you are interested in learning more about the pieces in our collection in general, we invite you to explore our online collection through our website. Launched just last year, several of our objects in our collection have been published online. We are constantly adding to this online database, so be sure to check back often to see more and more of our collection. When you arrive at our collections page, you can find some information about our collection, learn how to donate the object, and share feedback about our online collection. You can also request information about an object you may have in your personal collection that HC staff may be able to track down for you. By clicking Explore the Collection, you'll be redirected to online database. From there, you can explore our whole published collection on home or online at home, and you can follow along during one of our public tours. Learning about specific objects that may interest you. For example, if you were in the Chicora College dorm room at the Hampton Preston Mansion, you might want a closer peek at this book on the shelf, and you will learn that it was once owned by a student at the Presbyterian College for Women before it became Chicora College. Or if you wanted to learn more about the quilt displayed in the bedchamber at the Robert Mills House, you can actually see an image of the back of the quilt where the quilter signed and dated the piece. We encourage you to use this database both at home and while on your next tour. Even a few objects we will look at today are currently featured in this database, so feel free to follow along using the search field during today's presentation. What we want to examine today is the Journey to Freedom tour. This tour examines 2 of our sites, the Man Simon site and the Majeska Monty Simpkins house. The Man Simon site was home to the same entrepreneurial African-American family for nearly 130 years. It presents many archaeological artifacts found at the site in order to tell the story of this family. It also features several exterior ghost structures that are used to represent the buildings that would have once been a part of this compound. Named after one of the site's original inhabitants, enslaved midwife Celia Mann, the Simons portion of the site name is to recognize Mann's daughter, Agnes Jackson Simons, who you can see next to the image of this home. The Journey to Freedom tour also explores the home of human rights activist Majeska Monty Simpkins. Simpkins lived at her home on Marion Street from 1932 until her death in 1992. Born in Columbia, Simpkins was heavily involved with the NAACP and was a co-founder of the Richland County Citizens Committee, which focused on voters' education. An image of her appears on a shirt within our collection, as well as a quote by her stating, "I am a statement." This quote was from an interview regarding the public outcry for Black citizens who wanted a reflective representation in the state Senate. An interesting object can be found at the Man Simon site, which is this tailor's iron. 3 members of the Simons family made, altered, and cleaned clothes for a living. This 20-pound iron was one of 2 irons salvaged and preserved from the site prior to it becoming a museum. The other irons in our collections look very similar, yet weigh only 16 pounds. The larger the iron, the less pressure would be needed to press the clothing. The irons would have been heated directly with a fire. Often a tailor would use 2 irons at once so that once the first iron cooled, the second one could be quickly reheated. Irons would have been kept extremely clean in order to reduce the marks on the clothing. Depending on the material of clothing being ironed, the iron would also be rubbed with beeswax in order to keep it from sticking to the fabric and burning the object. This iron could be referred to as a tailor's goose iron because the shape of the handle looks a little bit like the neck of the goose. While this radio is not original to the site, we have evidence that supports that the family did own an Atwater, Kent radio. During an archaeological dig on the property, several pieces of this type of radio were found, indicating that the family likely owned a radio quite similar to this. The Atwater Kent Manufacturing Company was the largest maker of radios in the United States in the 1920s. Part of its popularity grew from advertising during the Atwater Kent Hour, a radio music program that the company sponsored on popular radio stations. Due to the Great Depression, many could not afford a luxury such as a radio. To combat this, Atwater Kent strived to create a model that was more cost-effective by involving less materials, but he still wanted to prioritize quality in his creations. This size and model of radio, referred to as a tombstone model, as it represents the shape of a tombstone, was successful during the Great Depression as it was affordable, yet various factors of the time led to the Atwater Kent Manufacturing Company to close in the early 1930s. By including this object in the museum's interpretation, it provides a physical representation of what the family would have been using for entertainment and information based off the archaeological discoveries at the property. As for the home of Modjeska Simpkins, there are several objects on display that relate to her work as a civil rights leader. One such example is this Jet magazine from October 20th, 1955. Jet magazine, which was especially prominent during the civil rights movement, focused on African-American news stories and personalities. This particular issue features an article on a, quote, economic squeeze on Black community members by white citizens councils in Clarendon and Orangeburg counties in South Carolina. The article includes a call for action from readers to send money and supplies to Modjeska at her home on Marion Street. This fundraising was to help raise awareness of the backlash that African Americans were facing following the Brown versus Board of Education decision. This Supreme Court case ruled to end separate but equal in public schools, but those who opposed this ruling were refusing to provide food, groceries, bank loans, and paying jobs to African Americans. The aid sent to Modjeska Monteith Simpkins' home was then provided to these African Americans in South Carolina. The article was advertised on the cover of the magazine next to information about the article's main article, the magazine's main article, which was how to photograph babies. This article features the New York model seen on the cover, Arlene Sluizer, who was very, very involved at the time in New York. The article in general is a heavy contrast to the article that references Modjeska Simpkins. Modjeska lived at her home from 1932 until her death in 1992. Her house had various styles of wallpaper throughout, some of which was salvaged and became part of our collection due to the connection to the site and to Simpkins. There are 8 different patterns appearing on the paper found between the 23 scraps of wallpaper. Since reinterpreting the site, Historic Columbia has included a sentimental touch in the design of the space. The patterns of the wallpaper were recreated as the backdrop of the current exhibition signage. This particular pattern was originally in one of the front 2 rooms of the house, and it can now be seen throughout the home on the signage, as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. Modjeska's home was the site of many civil rights discussions and activities. She opened her home, which also served as her office, to many during her life, including Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. As such, Modjeska made her house a home using various styles of wallpaper throughout the building. Located on the corner of Henderson and Hampton Street, The Woodrow Wilson family home was built in 1871 by the parents of Thomas Woodrow Wilson. While the family only remained in the home for about 3 years, the future US president would have witnessed aspects of Columbia's history during the Reconstruction era, which potentially would have impacted his decisions made during his time in office. The Reconstruction era, which followed immediately after the end of the Civil War, was fueled by racial, social, economic, and political unrest throughout the country. Reinterpreted and renamed in 2014, the Museum of the Reconstruction Era, the museum discusses the challenges and unrest in Columbia during this time. It highlights African-American leaders in South Carolina who were able to navigate this period of societal change, and it also brings attention to the various acts of aggression of those who opposed racial equality. This ballot box was used in Sumter County, South Carolina during the 1876 state election. During this election, Democratic strategists used acts of violence and intimidation in an attempt to control Black voter turnout. Another tactic was to manipulate the election results. By pressing tissue ballots together, voters were able to cast what appeared to be only one vote, yet several ballots would have been stuck together, therefore casting several votes. When the box would have been shaken, or when people in charge of tallying the votes counted the ballots, they would separate the ballots by blowing the ballots apart or slightly tearing them, therefore skewing election results. When the box was donated to Historic Columbia, it contained a written note describing the history of the box and how it completed voter fraud. Another object displayed at this site is a sculpture by John Rogers. He created a series of sculptures depicting people in the Civil War and the societal changes that occurred for them during this time. His work was commonly mass-produced in cast plaster, which was then painted a solid gray color. It was affordable, making it popular in the homes of the middle-class Americans. This sculpture shows a woman reciting an oath on a Bible to a Union soldier, with children looking at her. This oath was required to be recited by United States citizens for various things, including the ability to purchase supplies, goods, or to receive help from the US government. Clinging to the woman is a young boy, likely her son. His shoe is very worn, and you can even see his toe slightly peeking through. Also depicted is an African-American boy in tattered clothing. He likely would have been recently freed from slavery, but his presence here may indicate that he was still under the woman's service. Originally built in 1818, this large mansion on Blanding Street was purchased by Wade Hampton in 1823. His wife, Mary Canty Hampton, can be seen in this portrait completed by artist Henry Inman in 1836. Mary Canty would live at the mansion for 40 years with her children, grandchildren, and those she enslaved on the property. The Hamptons owned several plantation sites throughout the South, including 2 additional sites in Columbia. The Hamptons acquired an extreme amount of wealth from the enslaved labor that they had at these properties, which then helped to fund and furnish their lavish mansion in the city. Hampton's daughter, Caroline, and Caroline's husband, John Preston, would move into their Hampton Preston mansion with their family and expand the home prior to the Civil War. Following the war, the family would go bankrupt and the property would trade hands several times, going from a family home to a women's college to a tourist home, and then later to a museum. The site uses period rooms to display furnishings once owned by the family, as well as many local pieces. The site also explores also explores using other rooms the time that the house stood as a women's college and as a tourist home. This bust of Sarah Buchanan Bucky Preston is believed to have been sculpted when she was about 16 years old. Bucky was noted for her good looks and equestrian skills. She may have even perhaps caught the eye of French Emperor Napoleon III, who gifted Bucky a riding crop with her name on it. Had this been an attempt at courtship, it was unsuccessful, as Bucky instead married Colonel Lowndes of Charleston. She died 12 years into their marriage at the age of 38. She was buried at Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston. This bust, donated by her descendants, had sat at her grave at the cemetery until an act of vandalism threatened its safety. It was soon donated to Historic Columbia, and we hope to conserve the bust in the near future. The artist of the bust, Hiram Powers, was financially supported by Bucky's parents, Caroline and John Preston. Powers made a few other busts of Hampton and Preston family members, as well as the fountain that is owned by Historic Columbia. This fountain was conserved, and a reproduction of it is now in operation in the grounds of the Hampton Preston Mansion. This clock contains what may be a depiction of Trinity Cathedral. It was painted through a method in which the image is painted backwards on the rear of the glass. This then allows for a mirrored finish, and the glass therefore protects the painting from any scratches and forms of damage. The paper label on the inside of the clock is a little misleading. It states that the clock was manufactured by Markham and Case, a clockmaking business in Columbia during the early to mid 1800s. However, it was very common during this time for clockmakers in northern states to export clock parts to southern states like South Carolina. The southern states would then construct and sell the clocks, claiming the piece was locally manufactured. This allowed for these manufacturers to avoid paying heavy tariffs imposed on northern businesses. This clock is an 8-day clock, meaning it would only need to be wound once a week, which was much less of a hassle than a 30-hour clock, which would have to be set once a day, likely by an enslaved person. An item we have with a direct tie to the Hampton Preston Mansion is this iced teaspoon, which is currently on display in the Robert Mills Prideful Possessions Silver Gallery. Following the marked with the word Chicora, this spoon was used at the Chicora College of Women. Following the Civil War, many religious organizations created new educational opportunities for African Americans and for women. The College for Women was established around 1890 at the Hampton Preston Mansion. In 1915, it became Chicora College, which operated at the site until 1930. The college prepared female students to gain skills in the arts, the sciences, home economics, and also provided physical fitness opportunities through sports teams. A representation of Chicora College in the form of a dorm room can be seen in the Hampton Preston Mansion. This spoon was donated by the descendants of Marion Bailey Thompson, who attended Chicora College from 1914 until 1918. Marion was responsible in selling various Chicora College items after the college closed in Columbia. Marion kept the items she could not sell, including these spoons, and then later passed them down through her family. Her family then donated them to Historic Columbia. It was through the conscious efforts of Marion that the pieces of the original fountain that once was in the Hampton Preston Gardens were salvaged and donated to Historic Columbia, prompting the conservation of the fountain and its subsequent reproduction. This reproduction later was installed at the original spot on the Hampton Preston grounds, and it is in operation today. The Robert Mills House was designed by architect Robert Mills. Mills was a native of South Carolina. He was not only the first official architect of the state, but also of the country. Mills built many buildings along the East Coast, yet he designed only a few homes, making this property notable. The site was built in 1823 for local merchant Ainsley Hall and his wife Sarah, but due to Ainsley Hall's untimely death, the Halls never lived in the home. Instead, the building spent most of its life as several different educational institutions, including the Columbia Theological Seminary. It was saved from demolition in the 1960s by a group of preservationists that organized the establishment of Historic Columbia. This site was turned into a museum, showcasing what would have been the life of a wealthy white family living in Columbia, using period-appropriate artifacts to do so. One such example is this sofa, which is of a set of two. This set was likely constructed in Philadelphia around 1830 and had been displayed in the Robert Mills House since 1977. As Ainsley and Sarah Hall did not live in the home, we unfortunately do not have many of their formal possessions in the collection. However, this trunk contains a brass plaque which reads S.C. Hall, South Carolina, indicating that it was owned by Sarah Cook Hall. After the death of her husband, Sarah fought for her husband's estate in court in order to gain ownership of the house. Through a series of events, she briefly did own the property, but she had to sell it due to the high turn in the real estate market. She lived with a relative until 1851, when the court declared Sarah to be insane. At the time, insane could mean a plethora of things unrelated to mental illness. The term commonly included people who lacked financial means, which was especially true for female widows without children, like Sarah. The once leather-covered trunk likely was one of the few items Sarah was able to keep through her economic distress. This large tea set is commonly referred to as the Lafayette China. This set, which likely originated from Paris, was purchased by South Carolina Governor Richard Irvine Manning in 1825 in honor of a visit from the Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette was a French aristocrat who fought for the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. Once the United States gained independence, Lafayette returned to France, where he was a prominent figure during the French Revolution. 2025 will be the 200th year anniversary of Lafayette's visit to South Carolina, so we are very excited to highlight this tea set at the Robert Mills House. To see all of these objects and more, we invite you to join us on one of our tours. Our well-trained guides discuss the stories of these objects and how they were involved with those who lived in the city throughout the 19th and 20th century. Until you are able to view our sites, or if you want to learn more about some of the objects you saw today, please do visit our online database found on our website. We constantly are adding to this platform, and we are hopeful that you will enjoy learning more about our collection as it continues to grow. If you have any questions from today's program, feel free to contact me. I am happy to talk all day about the collections here at Historic Columbia. At this time, please be sure to put any questions in the chat and we can begin answering some of them. Let's see. Could you estimate how much time and money it takes to properly conserve a quilt if refolded as often as best practices dictates? Best practices ask that quilts are folded roughly every 6 months. Now, there are some ways you can avoid this by simply laying your quilt out on a bed so that it doesn't necessarily need to be refolded. In terms of an estimate, I really don't know if I would have an answer for that. That would be best answered by a quilt conservator or a conservator in general. But there are definitely ways that you can conserve a quilt by yourself at home, but I would definitely recommend reaching out to a historic society first before attempting anything, as quilts are made very specifically during their time, and modern detergents or modern means may not benefit your quilt in the long run. What are some of the resources that you use when researching objects? So the main one would be Google. That's a great place to start. Google image search has been very beneficial to us in recent months, but there is also Ancestry, which has been very, very helpful when tracking the maker of a piece or an owner of a piece. And there is also newspapers.com to assist in that. What I really like to use the most would be other museums, though, because they have definite resources that are available to them, and also other knowledge that can help us in learning more about our pieces. Let's see. What is your favorite objects? Well, textiles have a very special place in my heart, but one of my favorite collections of objects here at Historic Columbia happens to be our Reckling stereographs. So William Reckling was a local Columbia photographer who came to the US from Vienna when he was about 4 years old. After learning the trade, he went down to Georgia to establish a photography practice before later coming back to Columbia and establishing a shop on Richardson Street, which was later Main Street. Now, he created what is known as the popular series of Southern Views in the 1880s. These images, there's roughly 70 of them that are laid out on the back side of some of his cards. I really enjoy this list because he randomly skips a handful of numbers, which I just think is really funny. But today we have nearly 30 stereographs in our collection that were done by Reckling, and 20 of them are, 20 to 25 are the locations represented on the back of his cards that we can absolutely identify. These cards are pretty rare, so I get very excited when I see them pop up in online auctions, or if a donor is willing to share them with us. What is one of your favorite provenance discoveries? This actually happened quite recently. We have a trunk in our collection that had a very small tag with the previous owner's name on it. I did a little digging using Ancestry and using newspapers.com, and I found out that this woman remained unmarried throughout her life, but she became a portrait painter, mostly painting the portraits of her family members. Doing a little bit more work on her ancestry, I also then noticed that she has a distant relative of one of the people that are related to our sites. So that'll be very interesting to explore a little bit more down the line and see how else we can provide better interpretation for that piece. And lastly, are some objects harder to research and find information about than others? Now, this is very, very true. There are some objects that are very challenging to research. Now, this is because of various things. We are growing more and more as an organization and getting more and more access to various resources. One set of objects really that I think is very difficult to research sometimes can be objects related to women, especially during the 1800s. Now, the object I think about a lot is we have a friendship quilt in our collection that has the names of 36 women on it. Unfortunately, once women marry, they receive their new name, their married name. So tracing women using their maiden name versus their married name can be very complicated throughout time. And sometimes women only refer to themselves by their husband's initials and then their married name. So my goal with this quilt, for example, is to hopefully get the identities of the majority of these women, and that will then let me better date the quilts, as well as hopefully narrow down why this quilt was made. And that's all just going to depend on the resources that are available to me. And hopefully we can get a little bit more answers on this quilt. All right, well, as there seems to be no more questions from today's program, we do want to thank you for attending today's event. We are happy to provide programs like this for no charge, but we are appreciative of monetary donations, which you can make through our website at any time. Stay tuned to the events page on our website, as well as subscribe to our newsletter to get information on upcoming segments in this series, including preservation topics, presentation topics, and speakers for our next installment of Knowledge at Noon. Our next presenter for the month of August will be Jeffrey Richardson. Jeffrey Richardson will be discussing his past career as well as his current role as acting executive director of Historic Columbia. Registration for this event is free. You will receive a post-event email today with a recording of this program and a link to sign up for next month's Knowledge at Noon. We thank you for attending today's program, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.